It looks like the hashtag Free Stellar Blade movement has won, ladies and gentlemen, or at least for the short term future. Stellar Blade has had an update, a boss challenge mode of sorts that, interestingly enough, quietly added some suggestively revealing outfits, which, if you guys remember at launch of Stellar Blade, it became a huge backlash for Shift Up and Sony because the game was heavily censored compared to what was advertised to us before. And it caused quite a divide, quite a controversy, honestly, to the point where people were literally getting death threats over it. If you remember, Grum's got death threats over his Stellar Blade petition, which it's almost time for that petition to be fully completed and submitted, and it has over 90,000 signatures. Well, it looks like the petition is starting to do its job. Shift Up has quietly added these outfits on here, and you can see they are pretty gratuitous as far as the cleavage goes. When they originally announced Stellar Blade, they were announcing it as a game that would be uncensored worldwide. But then as soon as we got the game, there was a day one patch that censored a lot of the sexually suggestive clothing as well as some of the violence and other aspects of this game that upset quite a bit of the player base. Nevertheless, apparently it looks like the feedback was heard because now we quietly got this update. There was nothing that told us they would be adding any of these outfits to the game. It was almost just like a stealth drop. And apparently there's also other outfits that you can buy and stuff. So is this a start? Is this a win for the hashtag Free Stellar Blade movement? Yes. Now, honestly, this whole situation with the game was pretty wild if you really want to think about it. Like, think about where we're at in the gaming industry at this point to where we're actually having to fight for content in our games that was originally advertised. Think about that. Games that have artistic expression, sexualized characters. People are more upset about a female protagonist in a game being heavily sexualized, but they're at the same time they're cheering on characters being trans in games like Paper Mario. It's kind of wild to think about where people's prerogatives are as far as what they want in gaming and stuff and what they want to control and censor. Honestly, my whole issue with this whole Celebrate thing was the issue of censorship. I mean, think about how ridiculous the hard R controversy was with the hard R graffiti that was in the game that they had to patch out as well. And again, like I always say, you give people an inch, they will take a mile anytime that they have an opportunity to control something, censor something, push certain ideologies and narratives in the games. And I know people are like, dude, it's just a video game. You're upset because you don't have material to jack off to. Honestly, anybody that always leans to that insult, like, oh, you incels don't have anything to masturbate to, they don't understand the problem or the concept that there was with this game, because it was much more than that. Again, it was Sony and Shift Up taking back what they promised with the game, even though they do try to maintain that it was intentional, that the changes were intentional. It honestly wasn't. I think this was a bit of a backlash against them for the rightful things. And I definitely think that it was good that people spoke up against this censorship in video games. And it translates over to our media, to our music, our movies, our TV and stuff. Censorship in video games to the casual person might not sound like a big deal at all, honestly, because a lot of them are like, who cares? What are you crying about? It's honestly funny how people try to label things as small issues, especially the people from the woke side of things, because some of the stuff that they're the most pretentious about, some of the stuff that they cry about, like representation and diversity and yada yada and all this stuff that they like to have forcefully shoehorned in, and then when something like Stellar Blade comes out, they want to censor, they want to control things, they don't want diversity to be represented, and it's kind of like a weird double standard when it comes to this. Stellar Blade had a lot of hype behind it, and I think, honestly, when you sit back and take a look at the hashtag Free Stellar Blade movement, because of all the censorship, it gave the game more publicity than it would have probably originally had. Now, I'll be honest, the game itself is pretty average. It's not a Game of the Year candidate by any means, or any stretch of the imagination. It's pretty much a generic hack and slash game. So if they would have just quietly left this game alone and not bitched about having to censor some of the sexually suggested stuff and whatever Sony and Shift Up decided to do with patching stuff and the hard R controversy, I think this game would have been forgotten about pretty quickly. But no, this is proof that anytime that there's a progressive change, anything that is to appease these modern audiences that want no sexualized characters, they don't want women to be sexy in video games or music or movies and TV. They want stuff to appeal to a trans gaze. They want stuff to not be a definite female. I think as a result of them trying to meddle in and trying to censor stuff, it caused the game to be bigger than ever. It caused so much more free advertising than Shift Up could have ever imagined. This game sold way more copies physically than they could have ever imagined. When if they would have just shut the hell up, it probably would have been just an average game as far as game sales go. Again, anytime that progressive people try to step in and control stuff, it always immediately backfires. If you think about back when Hogwarts Legacy was a thing, look how many copies that game sold, all because people cried and tried to censor it and cancel people over the game. And then you had all this outstanding stuff with Stellar Blade, with the movement, and Grum's getting death threats, and people just overall becoming completely mask off about a game that probably would have just been an average game. It wasn't like this was a game that was going to change anything, but I'm a big advocate for freedom of speech, freedom of expression. If you try to censor stuff, I'm not a big fan of it, especially if it's not going to hurt anybody. There was nothing about this game that was going to hurt anybody, but these wokies were trying to say games like Stellar Blade hurt women, and then you had all these articles in Kotaku and Alyssa Mercante spouting their weird propaganda about this game just to try to harm it for whatever reason. And ultimately it looks like it backfired, because now this new update, this boss challenge update, is starting to slowly integrate sexualized, suggestively sexualized outfits in the game, which they were originally going to be in there anyway. And now all that fighting against this game was for naught, because ultimately Shift Up decided, hey, we're going to go for it, we're going to add all this stuff back into the game. So congrats to everybody for voicing their opinions on this game. It looks like we've won, and it looks like things are slowly starting to come back together with Stellar Blade. So check out the petition. I think it's going to end here literally like in a day or two, but if you haven't signed it yet, feel free. It is a cause for a game that apparently worked, and it's good to see this. It's good to see stuff like the hashtag Stellar Blade movement work, and Stellar Blade slowly but surely stop being censored. So looks like we won, guys. Looks like we won.